It's great to see you all for another live Action for Happiness event. Thank you so much for being part of this amazing community of people all around the world trying to create a happier and kinder world together. And I'm delighted that we're joined today by Ingrid Fetell Lee, who is a wonderful expert in joy, and really looking forward to our conversation. Welcome, Ingrid. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and thank you all. I'm so excited to be with you. And
It's
just a note, I'm so sorry. I've got my toddler's latest cold, and so my voice is a little hoarse, but hopefully you'll be able to hear me okay today.
Oh, well, thank you. We're hearing you fine and sending a lot of compassion your way. Really grateful that you can still be here despite having picked up germs from a little one. I know what that feels like, and that's happened to me very recently as well. So
Well, I wasn't
we're
going
a
to miss
very
it.
kind and
So,
supportive community here, and I'm sure everybody will be sending you a lot of appreciation for still making time for this. If you're new to this event, a very warm welcome. If you're part of this long-standing community, thanks for coming back. As you know, the format is Ingrid and I will have a conversation for about half an hour. We're going to dive into this topic of everyday joy, particularly how can we find joy in difficult times, because life isn't all easygoing, and yet there are still these opportunities we have day in, day out to cultivate more positive experiences. And then there's a chance for you to ask questions. So please do use the Q&A function. Ingrid will be happy to hear from you and answer your questions, assuming her voice holds out. And really, really looking forward to not only hearing your questions, but also doing a couple of interactive activities to hear from you and the community as well. But Ingrid, obviously you're an author, an expert in joy, a designer by background. Maybe you could say a little bit to start with about your own journey and why this topic's so important and interesting to you.
right. Well, it's interesting that you called me an expert on joy because I never set out to study joy. I set out to study design. And it was in my first year of design school. I studied, I went back to study design when I was a little bit older. I was already in my late 20s. And I had my undergraduate was English creative writing. So I always knew I wanted to be a writer. And then I spent some time living in a bunch of different places. I lived in Sydney, Australia for a while, and Washington, D.C. And then I decided to go back and study design. I was really interested in sustainability, and I thought I could be this sustainable designer helping us make the whole world more eco-friendly, all of the products that we use every day. And it was while I was there, it was in my first year, that they do this year-end review. And one of the professors made this comment. He said, "Your work gives me a feeling of joy." So I had all my stuff lined up, and this was just such a shock to me because I had been really focused on sustainable materials, eco-friendly plastics, minimal manufacturing materials. I wasn't thinking about joy. And then when I started to think about it, I thought, well, that's really weird because I'd always thought of joy as this very ephemeral, very fleeting feeling. It's not something that you can see or touch. It's not something that comes from stuff, right? That's what we're always taught. Our joy and our happiness don't come from stuff. So what was it about these things that created this feeling of joy? And I looked around at this panel of professors and no one could give me an answer. And that's how I got interested in this work. And that was 14 years ago. And I'm still studying this intersection between the things and the places that surround us, the physical world around us, and this wonderful, mysterious feeling that we call joy.
Lovely. And with that sort of spirit of discovering joy, I know that, part of the importance of this topic isn't just the theory, it's like the experiential aspect of that feeling. And I know you do interactive things, and I wondered if you might like to take us through a little sort of interactive, maybe visualization or something to help us reconnect with that sense of joy. Is there anything you could guide us through to do that for the audience?
I would love that because we all know, we also have a sense of what we're talking about when we talk about joy. But rather than just talk about it, since we're going to be spending this hour together focused on joy, it's so much better if we can just take a moment to feel it. So what I would love you to do wherever you are, just if you can, if you're driving or operating heavy machinery right now, don't close your eyes. But otherwise, take a moment, close your eyes. And what I want you to do is to think back to a time in your life that felt joyful. So it could be a time when you felt completely free, or a time when you laughed so hard that it hurt. Maybe it was a time when the world felt magical to you, or a time when you were surprised by the power of a simple pleasure. Now, if you have a moment in mind, take this time to go back to that time and place. Remember where you were and what was around you, who you were with. Remember what the light was like, what the ground felt like under your feet. Maybe there is a sound or a scent that can help put you back in that memory. And when you're really back there, I want you to now just notice what's happening inside your body. What does the feeling of joy feel like to you? Is it in one place, or is it more all over your body? Is it still, or is it moving around? Does it have a color or a shape, a temperature or a texture? Just notice what that feeling of joy is like in your body. And we'll just do this for a few more seconds. Just stay with this feeling. And then you can open your eyes. And I would love to know, there are a couple things I'd love to know, but let's start with, if you want to share in the chat, what was the memory? What was the moment that was joyful for you?
Well, I'd love to read some of these out as they appear in the chat, but mine was a particular memory of camping with friends on a day when England won a World Cup quarterfinal, and then we all went and jumped in a river on a sunny day, and it was just like, these things don't normally all happen together, and it was just a lovely sense of joy. But so I'm seeing wedding day, saw somebody made me smile, a walk on the beach, running, a day with my family, tree climbing, the birth of my children, dancing and feeling light and colorful, running a treasure hunt, kicking autumnal leaves, comedy show with my friends, skiing under a clear blue sky, catching fireflies, falling in love, dancing, drumming to my first song, my sisters, my mother and I all at a festival, going to school with my daughter on a results day, blowing giant bubbles for my neighbors' children, traveling with my husband, front row at my favorite band's concert, and so many more that I can't even read. But I'm feeling really boosted by this list. It's lovely.
It's a wonderful list. It's really joyful. And you know what I noticed is, I mean, it's really interesting, and we can talk more about this, but you have moments that are very big, the birth of my child, my wedding day, and then you have moments that are very, very small, like kicking autumnal leaves. And that is, I think, the power of joy, is that it really runs the gamut of our experiences. It happens in moments that are really momentous, but it can also happen every day. And one of the reasons I love that exercise is because we all know what anxiety feels like in our bodies, right? Like if I asked you, what does anxiety feel like? You know what that feels like in your body. You know that, and it might be different for everyone, but maybe there's butterflies in your stomach, or sweaty palms, or you get clammy. There are all kinds of things that come with anxiety. I think we often forget that joy is something we also feel in our bodies. And so remembering what that feeling of joy, what the visceral feeling of joy is like, can help you tune into those moments more often, because you can notice your body feeling joy and remember, oh, that's what that is. That's joy. It just caught me by surprise.
Well, should we ask just if people would like to share how they experience the joy in their body? Because I think that's a really fascinating point. And I felt it very much kind of in my heart area. It's like a kind of feeling of expansion in the chest, weirdly, was where my joy felt. But I'm just going to see what other people are saying in the chat. Tingling, uplifting, lightness, warm chest and belly. I felt at peace. My heart swelled, exciting, feeling lighter, feeling in my spine, open heart, being in the moment. I couldn't stop grinning, a smile you can't control, calm and full, desire to dance, butterflies, catching my breath. Wow, I love that. What I love. Is this? Are you seeing things here, Ingrid, that you've seen in many other people as well?
Yeah. So I mean, everyone has a different experience of it, but there are certain commonalities, and actually there are biological reasons for that. So, one of the ones that I'm seeing a lot is warmth, a sense of warmth, and a sense of, feeling it in the chest or feeling it in the upper body. Joy is an approach-oriented emotion. It primes us to move toward things that feel good. And so blood flow increases, blood rises up into our chest and into our face. And it's sort of, our blood flow increases when we're in a state of joy. So it makes sense because it's priming us to approach. So it makes sense that we feel that warmth. People often talk about a sense of expansiveness, and we see that in the body position of joy. And actually, Charles Darwin was one of the first to observe this in his expressions of motion in man and animals. This is something, he was very ahead of the curve on, was noticing there are certain universal postures and expressions that we make in different emotions. And one of the things we do is our bodies expand. So if you're cheering for your team and they hit a goal, your arms go up, your body expands, your chest opens up, you breathe more freely. And so there are a lot of, there are both positive effects that come out of that. And it just naturally feels good when you have that emotion of joy to sort of open up, and we're more open to the world. When we're in sad or anxious emotions, it's almost as if we have a vestigial tail. We tuck our tail, we roll in, we curl in for protection, or we cast our attention downward. And that sort of, again, brings the attention inward and makes us feel more closed in. So joy is an emotion that expands us out.
So now we've experienced it, and I love that feeling. I'm feeling more joyful. I can sense that in the community. Why don't we just take a step back and talk about what we mean by joy? Because, of course, with Action for Happiness, we're talking a huge amount about this overall sense of living a happy and meaningful life, which in some ways is quite a grand, profound concept. How does that differ from how you think about joy, and why is it worth perhaps framing these things in slightly different ways?
Yeah, I think it's so important. And, this community being versed in the language of happiness probably has a better foundation for it than most. But I do find that we use those words joy and happiness often interchangeably in our culture. We hear those words tossed around a lot. So I want to pull them apart. And I'll start with happiness, which people might be familiar with. But the way that I think about happiness is a broad evaluation of your life over time. So it has to do with whether you have a sense of meaning and purpose in life, how connected you feel to other people, how you feel about your work and your health. There are lots of different factors that go into that equation of happiness, which I think is why you can take so many different kinds of actions toward happiness, because it isn't just one thing. It is something that you assemble for yourself. Excuse me. Joy, on the other hand, is much simpler and more immediate. So when psychologists use the word joy, what they mean is an intense, momentary experience of positive emotion. And this is one that makes us smile and laugh and feel like we want to jump up and down. It gives us that expansive feeling and that warm, tingly feeling. All of those things are associated with that feeling of joy. So if happiness is how good we feel over time, joy is how good we feel right now, in the moment. And I think that it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it can make us tend to overlook moments of joy because they seem so small, right? They're so easy to get lost in the shuffle. And we're often coached to focus on long-term goals, on big goals and milestones as sources of happiness, right? I think that's the model that's often set out for us in society. We're, trained to look toward getting married, buying a house, getting a promotion, getting the right job as those things, as big sources of happiness. And in the process, these little moments of joy they don't seem like they add up to much. So it's easy to overlook them. At the same time, these moments of joy, they have surprisingly powerful effects. And I think when we start to notice more of these moments of joy, they have these sort of cascading positive effects that really build toward happiness, that lead us in the direction of happiness.
Yes, I love that. And that's very much consistent with the way we think about this world with the work, with Action for Happiness, but also my own experience of like little things mattering a lot more to our overall sense of well-being than perhaps we would otherwise give them credit for. But it also brings me into something that I think is very relevant for many of us and for our world right now, but also for what you're going through right now yourself, Ingrid. For anyone who's joined us late, Ingrid told us at the start that she's just picked up a bug from her little one and is not feeling very well, has lost her voice. So we're incredibly grateful that you're still making time for this and being so joyful and so coherent despite the loss of voice. And what that reminds me of is this idea of resilience. And actually, you would think at one level that dark times and challenges are the absolute opposite of joy and almost incompatible with. And yet I think your work, and maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, suggests that, actually in some ways it's in those times of biggest challenge that joy has a potential to shift our perspective and support and nurture us to kind of cope better. So at a time, I mean, first of all, I guess we have to acknowledge this is a time when all around the world people are dealing with a lot and there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of concern. How do you think about those big sufferings and where joy plays into that? But also, how do you deal with the fact that you're having a bit of a tough time today, and is joy part of that for you? So resilience and joy, over to you.
Well, let me start with the science. So there's good research to show that when we feel these small moments of joy, it helps to reset our cardiovascular responses to stress. So what I see a lot of us do is we put off joy when we're going through a stressful time. We say, I got to get through that presentation. I can't take a day off this month. I can't, go on this trip that my friends want to go on or that my family wants to go on. I have to stay focused and get through, just push through, right? Or I can't go to that dinner party. My inbox is just overflowing, right? So we just postpone joy and we postpone joy and we postpone joy. And yet those small moments of joy are actually the thing that would help us be more resilient, would help us resist burnout, for example, because they help to reset our blood pressure, our heart rate, our cortisol levels, all of those markers of stress, even just from having small moments, like, watching a funny video or just having a 5-minute stroll through nature. All of those things can help reset those responses and make us more resilient over the long haul. And in research done in the wake of 9/11, researchers found that people who allowed a little bit of joy into their coping with really tragic, life events, tragic happenings in the world, recovered better than they were before. So instead of just rebounding to where they were, they experienced what psychologists often call post-traumatic growth. So they were more likely to grow as a result of the hardship that they were experiencing, and turn that into something beneficial in their lives. So I think there are a lot of reasons why, allowing ourselves these little moments can aid our resilience. And I often think, a big piece of it is just simply that if we don't allow ourselves to feel the sorrow, we're not able to actually feel all the joy. The depth of our sorrow is, in some sense, proportional to the height of our joy. And if we numb out when we're facing hardship, we will still be numb when the joy comes. So it's really important to find ways to both allow ourselves to experience the joy when it's hard and make sure we don't tune out the sorrow either, so that we are fully present for all of our emotions.
That's really wise and really helpful. Ingrid, I feel, especially with my Action for Happiness hat on, that I'd love to explore a little bit of some of the practical ways. So I'm sure people here are thinking, great, this all sounds brilliant. What do I actually do? Just to share one example that I came across recently, as a practice I've been doing for years, which is think of things that you're grateful for, which I've been very supportive for my mental well-being. But someone tweaked that for me and said, at the end of each day, try and think and bring to mind things that made you laugh and smile. And I was like, oh, that's slightly different. And actually found it really interesting to kind of think, oh yeah, that was actually a really funny moment when we giggled about that thing and smiled. And it made me, doing that made me more on the lookout for like moments of like laughter the next day. And so that was one example I found really helpful, just to keep me with a slightly more joyous approach to my day. I'm sure you've got, and in fact, I know from your work, you've got loads of practical things. What do you find really helps you cultivate joy in on a daily sense?
So a few things I would say. One of my favorites is a practice I call joy spotting. Joy spotting is simply a practice of going out into the world and tuning your attention to what brings you joy. Just noticing using your senses to bring you joy. And I've heard from people, they do it on their commute, they do it while walking their dog, they do it with their kids on the way to school. But it's, it's a mindfulness exercise, but it's not simply about presence. It's about recognizing that anywhere you are, there's usually something that you can tune your attention to that will elevate you, that will lift your spirits. It might be a color, it might be a quality of life. And I think when you start to look through this lens, even things like orange parking cones can become a source of joy, because you're looking out at the gray city and you're like, gosh, those parking cones are really joyful. They're a very joyful orange. I never noticed that before. So it's a way of seeing your surroundings with a new lens and just tuning into that feeling of joy, and then share that joy. Because of course we know that when you find something that's joyful, you experience more joy if you share it with someone else. And it helps deepen that relationship. It deepens the sense of trust and intimacy and connection. So I think that's really powerful. I have a similar one to yours. Friends of ours actually said that their 7-year-old came home one day and started asking the question, what was the silliest thing that happened to you today? And I love this one because, what our friends, what the parents said is that it made them start to think about things that were happening to them that weren't good, but were actually kind of silly. So, for example, the mom in this case missed her subway stop because she was really annoyed about an email that she'd just received. And so she missed her subway stop and had to get off and come back the other way. And when she was really annoyed about it in the moment. But when she retold it after her daughter asked that question at dinner, she thought that was really silly. Like, I was so upset about an email that I missed my entire subway stop. And so I think that question, like what made you laugh today, it helps you kind of reframe things that happen, and get a little bit of joyful perspective.
I love joyful perspective. I think that's such a really lovely concept. I also really like that, the joy of an orange traffic cone. I had one little bit like that, which was quite silly today. I was getting some keys cut for our house, and the guy said, do you want to put like a little color cap on it just so it kind of stays on the keyring better? And the default option was a kind of gray. And I saw the box, I was like, can I get the bright green ones? They look really fun. And I was like, I guess that was quite a joyful thing to do. So now all our house keys have got bright green tops on them, which is kind of fun.
Totally. I mean, I think, the other thing I often say is, can you create micro moments of joy? And because no one needs more work, but, a big part of my approach, my philosophy is that joy isn't just something you have to find. It's something you can create. And so if you think about joy as something you can create, you can add color, you can add, so color is a great way to access joy. You can, what's something you can do to make something just a little bit more special? So for example, I have a reader who celebrates, her name is Patty, and whenever anyone in her family has good news, they celebrate with a red plate. So they have a red plate in amongst the dishes, and whenever someone has good news, they get the red plate that evening. And it's just this very simple, tangible way of creating this little micro moment and micro kind of ritual of joy and celebration in the everyday.
What I like about that is it brings us on to another concept I wanted to ask you about, which is about joy not as an individual endeavor so much as a collective experience. And that's a really nice example of something that not only signifies a joyful thing, but also is a way of connecting with others. How do you see joy in connection with relationships? Perhaps some of our most joyful moments are together with others. I don't know. What's your sense of that connection?
I mean, I think that's absolutely true. Studies have shown that, when you add someone to an activity, it automatically gets more joyful. And so, and it can be any kind of activity. And they've looked at all different kinds of leisure activities, even activities that people typically enjoy doing solo, like hiking or journaling, or, but it turns out if you add another person and you do it together, it automatically becomes more joyful. So there's no question that adding, doing something together increases your joy. I often think that in relationships, we get into ruts of going for coffee, especially with friendships, right? It's so hard to maintain friendships, especially at certain life stages, like the one I'm in where you have kids, and, it's hard to meet up with friends, and we get into ruts of doing the same thing over and over and over again. I think thinking about how you can make those moments more joyful by thinking about something fun or different to do can be really, really powerful. And, maybe that's going to see an art exhibit together, or, going to try some activity that's new that you've never done before. A friend of mine just went line dancing last night, first time, learned how to go line dancing. So I think, anything that you can do just to increase, especially if it's someone who, it's a really important relationship, but it's not always a joyful one. I think we all have those people in our lives, maybe family, for example, family members where, we care a lot about the person, but it's not always, it doesn't always feed us to spend time together. But that person really matters to us. Sometimes it's a matter of injecting joy back into the experience of being together. I think that can be really helpful.
Yeah, and that makes me think of another thing that I think comes up a lot, which is I would love this person that I'm with or I care about to be more joyful. Like I'd love to help them kind of, be less down and whatever. But I sense that we often, with good intention, try to respond to that feeling in ways that are rather unhelpful for the person who's not feeling joyful. Is there a more sort of intelligent way that we can help, rather than sort of telling people, hey, be happier, sort of, and help them feel and experience joy rather than berating them for the way they are feeling, or indeed not accepting them for the way they're feeling?
Right. So there may be like two different kinds of people in the chat here. There may be people here who are like, I am always that person who just wants I just want people to be happy. I just want people to feel good. And I just want them, look how much they have. I want them to be able to see how much they have and not be so focused on what's bringing them down. And, why are people complaining all the time? Life is hard, but it's also really good. And, so there's that type of person. And then there's also the type of person who's like, but sometimes things, I don't want to feel joyful. I don't want to feel happy. Right. And so what I often see is, people come to me and they come to my work and they're like, I feel joy. How do I get this other person to feel more joy? And it's a really positive intention. But sometimes it also comes from a kind of polarization that happens. So when we just want everyone to feel good and joyful, and it's such a positive intention, but this person really doesn't feel joyful, what happens when we keep saying, but look on the bright side, or, oh, but you have so much, or you should be grateful for what you have, is they just feel more frustrated because they don't feel heard, right? And they still aren't getting any access to that joy. You can't tell someone to feel joy. It will never work. So I think what does work is to pause. And really, it's so hard because I think this mentality of just look on the bright side is what got me through probably the first 18 years of my life. And I had a really, really challenging childhood. My mother went through a serious mental illness. My parents divorced when I was 2, so I grew up going back and forth between 2 different houses. There was a lot of instability in my life as a result of my mother's illness. And I think, that was a very powerful coping mechanism for me. So it served me really well. But, then I came up against friends and others who really didn't have that same feeling. And 2 things happened. One, it was very freeing for me to not always have to look on the bright side. It was hard for me to let go of that feeling like, it's hard for me to let go. But once I was able to let myself feel, I was able to have a bad day and allow myself to feel that was liberating. And on the other hand, they got more open to joy because I wasn't pushing it. So what I would offer is to make space for those feelings and resist the temptation to try to solve problems and just sit and listen. Say, yeah, that sucks. That really sounds like it sucks. And then create an invitation, some kind of invitation to do something joyful, whatever that looks like. Maybe that's, you know what, this has been a crappy day. Let's go get ice cream. I think we should go get ice cream. Or let's go. Do you want to come with me just 5 minutes? I just want to go see. There's a tree down the road that just turned color and it's bright red. And let's just go look at it for 5 minutes, So create the invitation, the opportunity. Keep, a ball in your car or a frisbee in your car. Just go throw the frisbee for 5 minutes, right? When you're in the middle of a fight or something. So create the space for the invitation as opposed to have that, sense that you need them to change their mind.
So if we want to help people, it's less about us trying to fix their problems or tell them to feel a certain way. It's more about accepting whatever's going on for them and then coming up with some kind of action that will actually bring both of you a bit of joy in practice rather than in theory. Yeah, I love that invitation idea. I feel a desire to go back to the community now to ask a couple of things. I mean, one is we've heard some ideas. I shared one, you shared many, but I sense there's a lot of wisdom in this community. I'd love to just ask people, what are some of the little things that you already do that bring you joy, and just see if there's anything we haven't already covered. So if you'd like to share again, folks, like sources of joy in your life or little habits or things that consistently give you this experience that we've been talking about. And I'll just read a few of these out again. So smiling at strangers, reading self-help books, morning yoga, plants, birds, being in nature, drumming, stroking a cat, the color purple, saying thank you, playing with my dog, lots of walking, being in the park, coffee, cooking, volunteering, cup of tea, calligraphy, solitude, hugs, crafting, making others laugh, being with neighbors, scented candles, smelling a horse. I think that said that was fantastic. Being silly and like so many lovely things I can't even read them now. Singing, of course, visiting the men's shed. I love the men's shed concept. That's brilliant. Yeah, wow, that's an amazing list. How are you feeling as you see all those joyful ideas?
So, I mean, I love seeing this, and it just speaks to there's so many different things you can do, right? And it can be so individual. I think there are a couple of things I noticed. One person mentioned fairy lights, and I love that for this time of year. I think we're those of us in the northern hemisphere are losing our light very rapidly, and there's lots of research that shows that light can be very beneficial to our overall well-being, and particularly our joy, that it regulates our serotonin levels, our melatonin levels, so our energy and wakefulness. And so bringing more light into your space, I think, can be a really, it's an underrated, very simple source of joy. I saw plants, taking care of plants. That was another one. And of course, there's lots of great research around that. I saw weeing alone, which as a mom, I can relate. So that's a really good one. Little moment of privacy, real good one there. So I think there are lots of things. The reason I'm talking in particular about spatial things is, as a designer, there's a power to things you can put in your space that will give you that burst of joy every day. So if there's a dark corner of your house and you can add a little light to it, that's something that every day you can get that repeatable burst of joy. It's not something you have to motivate yourself to do. It's something you do once and then it pays you back every day. So that's, a brightly colored coffee mug, adding something brightly colored to your workspace. I also saw smelling candles. Oh, another one I really loved was bird song, listening to the birds. That's another one that has really been shown to, instill these feelings of joy, to hear the sounds of birds, all natural sounds, in particular the sounds of birds. It's calming to the nervous system. So I love all of those things because, if you put a bird feeder outside, then the birds are going to come and you're going to hear them. And every day you have to go fill it once in a while, but that's a repeatable source of joy.
Oh, you reminded me of my dear grandma who spent so much of her time sitting at her dining room table just looking at the birds on the bird feeder. She knew all their names. She could watch them for hours and would always be smiling. Um, I'm also glad you brought back in your design expertise, though, and this idea that colors and patterns and shapes can make a difference. And actually, I'm reminded that you told me a gorgeous story about when a gas man came round to your house once. I wondered if you might like to share that, because I thought that was a lovely example of how much of a difference these little things can make.
Right. That's right. My stove went out a couple of weeks ago, and so let me back up. My house, the house I'm living in now, I've been in for a couple of years, but it's been slowly transforming it. I tend to like to go room by room. I don't like to, we're living in it. We have a small child. It's not like we can move out and renovate it. And when we bought it, it was very brown. I mean, there was a lot of wood and brown and very blah. And I mean, if you love brown, brown is great, but I don't love brown. And so it was just very monochrome. And I really wanted to bring in color. And so in January, we left our house for 10 days and we painted the kitchen green. We painted the living room, this deep, almost like a deep periwinkle blue. And then we put up this wallpaper in the dining room that's has colors both in it, and it looks like a spring garden. It's just red and yellow and blue and green, and it's multicolored and so joyful. And so it brings us a lot of joy. But the biggest thing for me was my stove went out, and the gas man came because I wanted to make sure that nothing was going to blow up. And he was testing the stove and testing the gas, and he looked around and he said, he's like, I hope this isn't insulting, but this house makes me feel like a kid. I said, it's just the colors. He's like, that green. He's like, what is that green? He's like, you never see that green anywhere. And he's like, it's not mint, but like, what is it? And then he's like, and that blue. He's like, I would never think to put that blue with that green, but that blue. And he's like, it just makes me feel like a kid. And the telling thing in there is that he was worried he would offend me. So obviously he doesn't know me. But I think we have such an association of joy with childishness in our culture, and color and vibrancy with childishness, that it's almost like people worry that if I have this feeling of joy, like inner childish joy, that means that there's something bad, there's something it means that it was childish, and someone would be offended because what they wanted was for everything to be sophisticated. Well, what I want is a home where everyone feels good. And so for me, that was a win. And I think you can do both. I think you can absolutely balance color and pattern and do it in ways that are incredibly elegant and sophisticated. But I, for me, it was a marker of success, even though he thought maybe it wasn't.
I love that story. I think it was brilliant. In a moment, Ingrid, we're going to come to the Q&A from the audience. So, folks, if you have a question for Ingrid and you haven't already put it into the Q&A, please use that. And if you see another question you like, you can leave a little thumbs up to vote, and we'll have a look at the most popular questions. But I just wanted to loop back to where we started, which was, these are tough times for many people in the world. We've got existential global issues around uncertainty and war and conflict. And we've got obviously the very real issues many people are facing around health and finances and relationships and stress and mental health challenges. And a bit like you just said, that we kind of almost don't give ourselves permission to be childish sometimes. I think some of us who care deeply about what's going on in the world think, well, you can't really care about the suffering in a conflict zone and still love the bright colors of a spring day. And it's like, well, actually, I think what you're saying is that no, these aren't incompatible. In fact, our ability to respond wisely to difficult stuff in our lives, in the world, is enhanced when we have more of these micro moments, these little glimmers of joy. Is that right?
I mean, when we stay in a protracted state of stress and anxiety and despair, there's research that shows that we sort of turn inward, that we basically get exhausted, we basically get fatigued from being in this state in a perpetual way. And I think that the level of crisis that we are able to witness because of our phones, because of the global nature of our world, and our connectivity is probably at a scale that's different than we were wired for, right? So if we think about, what kinds of tragedy we would have had access to when we were small bands of hunter-gatherers, it's very different than this kind of constant sense of war and climate disruption and all of these, things, in addition to everything that's going on in our day-to-day personal life. And so I think it's really important to have these moments of relief. One of the original conceptions of positive emotions was that they function as breathers, sustainers, and restorers. So they give us a break from what's really intense. They sustain us when we're doing something difficult, and they restore our reserves so that we can do other things. And I think, the other thing that's useful to think about is this, and imagine many of you are familiar with it, the broaden and build hypothesis, which is this idea that, positive emotions evolve to, negative emotions narrow our focus in to enable us to deal with threats and challenges. Positive emotions broaden our focus out so that we can take advantage of, so we can play and connect and grow, so that we can build resources for the future. If we are constantly in this state, we are not building resources for the future. And yet that's exactly what we need to do to survive and thrive amid these crises. So remembering that you can hold two emotions at the same time. You can hold deep empathy, stress, grief, anxiety, and you can hold a moment of joy. I think, before I started this work, I used to think, if I'm having a bad day, I'm having a bad day. And that's it. And I have to just get through it and wake up the next day and hope it's going to be better. But what this work has really shown me is that I can be having a bad day, and one little shaft of light can penetrate and just give me that moment of joy and release. And it doesn't take away from my empathy, my compassion for what's happening elsewhere. It just gives me more reserves to be able to participate in the actions I need to take to improve those conditions.
I think that's such a profound message, Ingrid, because it's shifting us from like joy as a frivolous kind of nice to have when life's going well to a fundamental skill for wise living, and both building capacity and supporting each other and ourselves. I think it sort of completely changes the sort of popular conception of this, the experience of positive emotions. Let's come to some questions. So Charlotte has asked, which links to what we've just been saying, really, but how can you find joy when things look bleak and dark, especially with chronic health problems?
Because that's a thing that is not going to, it's something that you're managing on an ongoing basis.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I think about with chronic health especially is thinking about energy, right? Because energy is often the hardest thing to come by in those situations. You don't have as much energy for what you love to do. So really thinking about, focusing in on those moments and thinking, like, if I only have 5 minutes to devote to something that brings me joy every day, what's one thing that I could do literally every day that I could make time for, that I could save that energy for? For me, I started recently drawing every day, but I don't have a lot of time because I have a toddler. And so for me, I do it in bed before I go to sleep. And I just, I find a photo on my phone. Right now I'm drawing people, or I find photo in a magazine and I just draw. Really, sometimes it's 5 minutes. But that every day I get a little better, and every day I feel a little bit more connected to this thing that brings me joy. So I think finding ways to stay connected in an ongoing way to something that brings you joy can be really powerful.
And you're reminding me that in our follow-up tomorrow, we're going to send around links to some of your great resources, which we'll say a bit more about towards the end. So do stick around, folks. We've got another little interactive thing I just want to end with, but let's come back to these great questions. Abigail says, how can we make sure that the things that we find joyful don't become mundane or ordinary? How do we keep them feeling special?
Right. Okay. So you're thinking about maybe the hedonic treadmill and the way that we start to acclimate to things over time. I think that you've probably noticed this in your own life, that some things don't seem to get old, right? Nature doesn't seem to get old. The people you love, your child, or your dog, or there are just certain things that don't seem to get old. So I think first recognizing that, the designer Heavy Millman gives this, she uses this phrase, the joy doesn't metabolize, which I love. It's like it doesn't get used up and eaten up, that there are certain things that I think she has something in her shower. It's like a soap dish or something. And every time she sees it, it brings her joy. So start to notice the difference. What are the things, the art piece in your home, or the mug, or, sometimes it's big things, but sometimes it's small. Start to notice which things have a joy that doesn't run out, and start to ask yourself, what is it about those things? Because often you can find patterns. Often you can find things repeatable, that are transferable, that you can find other things like that. I think also, the joy of play, the joy of celebration, these things, a happy dance every Friday doesn't get old, right? The joy of play is always unpredictable. That doesn't get old. So I think starting to introduce those elements, that can be a way to make sure that the joy is durable over time.
I love that. And Ingrid, you may have seen that we have with Action for Happiness a series of monthly themes and these amazingly popular calendars that people share all around the world. And November's theme is New Ways in November. And new ways can obviously mean new activities and doing new things. But actually, for me, it also means looking at the same things in new ways. So like, here's a situation, here's an environment, here's something that is very familiar, but I can see something different about it. And I think some of the joy language is about sort of not just where we are and what the environment's like, but how we choose to interpret it and what we look for and what we see. Like, again, if you say to me, look for the beautiful colors in a room, I'm going to find it a very different experience than if I wasn't looking for colors in a room, so.
Totally. I mean, and so if you take a walk every day and that's starting to get old, maybe, one day you look down and another day you look up and another day you look for a particular color. And you can try different things like that to make it fun, and to sort of bring, like, it's basically a technique for bringing yourself back into that moment and keeping yourself present there.
Which links nicely to Varney's question. Could you share some tips on how to make our surroundings more joyful or more conducive to joy?
Absolutely. So color is one of the most universal aesthetics of joy. So bright color in particular, and adding pops of color. It's actually timely. I'm working on a blog post this week about how to add pops of color to your space on a budget. So it's a very, very timely question. I already mentioned light. I already mentioned plants. Another thing is round shapes. So circles, spheres, these are the shapes of childhood. They're most associated with joy. Also squiggles, scallops, anything that has a rounded edge. So we live in this very rectilinear world. Our doors, our windows, our homes are all square and rectangle. But bringing in these curved shapes, the curve is literally the physical language of play. When you watch children playing, they do the same things that we do. Like if they're play fighting, for example, they do the same things that adults do, but they do it with curves. So curves are the way that we suggest, that we show that we're playing. So curves are the motion of play. And of course, you see lots of circles and spheres in childhood, bubbles, balloons, balls, merry-go-rounds, Ferris wheels. There's so many things, hula hoops that are round. So bringing in more curves, that could be a round coffee table. It could be, circular light fixtures or spherical light fixtures. Those things always have a way of adding. They change the feeling of the space around them, and they create a very joyful feeling. Even if you don't love color, for example, if you want to have a more neutral home and you want more joy, round mirror, round shapes can really add that joy.
That's lovely advice. Luan is saying they're finding it hard to access joyful memories. You did that exercise at the beginning, sort of bringing back a sense of joy. Um, I mean, her question is any suggestions on tapping into joyful memories? But I guess linked to that is that a helpful practice as well?
Yeah, I mean, so here's the thing. Some of us have had very joyful lives so far, and some of us have not, right? Um, so, one of the things I learned early on in doing that exercise is that childhood is not a joyful time for everyone. So some people automatically want to go back to childhood for those memories. And for a lot of us, childhood is not when we find those memories. It's more recent. I'm someone who I feel like my life has gotten better the older I've gotten. And so I don't think, saying not everyone is going to have the joyful memories to access. Now, if you do have the joyful memories, photos can be really helpful. So it's at times a lot of people aren't connected with the joy. Like, for example, in a year, you might not really remember. You might feel like I didn't do anything joyful this year. And then you scroll back through your camera roll and you think, oh my gosh, I actually did a lot of joyful things this year. I just didn't realize it. So sometimes visuals can be a really helpful aid if you do have those memories and you're just not recalling them. So I think visuals can be really great for that. But if you don't have those memories, if you feel like that's not where your joy has been, then your work is to start making them, right? Which is such, I mean, I get so many emails from people who are like, I'm 78 and I just read your book and I finally am going to let myself feel joy. I'm like, amazing. I'm so sad. Like, I'm sad that it took that long. And I'm so excited because it's never too late. And so I would start looking at like, what are things that have brought you joy that maybe got interrupted or cut off at some point in your life? Maybe you were told that you were no good at drawing or singing, for example. Maybe you love to climb trees, but you had a very safety conscious parent who never let you do anything risky. So you just developed this very risk averse, very safe orientation of the world. And now you're like, well, maybe it would be fun to do something that's a little, more out on the edge. So I think starting to ask yourself, where did your joy get cut off? Or if you're going through a new period in life, trying something new, maybe a lot of people who are empty nesters going through a divorce, your joy changes and you find joy in different things. And so that's a perfect opportunity to just explore and say, what if I had a whole day to myself? What might I like to do? What would be fun? And just start looking. There's something you can find online, actually. It's called the Pleasant Events Schedule. It's like a tool used in psychology research. If you Google it, Pleasant Events Schedule, and it will, it's like just a list of things that people enjoy doing. So if you really are at a loss, I recommend just going through it and just seeing like, what on this list brings me joy? It's a very random list, and it's really great for just stirring up. Like, yeah, that does sound like fun, actually.
I love that. And I also like your point about reconnecting with things that brought you joy earlier. I mean, two things that brought me a huge amount of joy as a child were cycling and singing. And then both things I didn't do for years and years. And then in my adult life, I've got back into cycling and into singing in a choir. And it's like, wow, this is so joyful.
Yes.
But also back to the question, I've tried to do that photos thing. So every year I slightly annoy my family by going back through pictures I've taken that year and putting together like a kind of my 30 or 50 favorite memories from the year, and then sitting everyone down and going, hey guys, let's relive the year. And they're like, oh, go on then. And that actually is a really joyful kind of experience. But if, as you say, people don't have that to hand. Another thing that someone else introduced me to is the idea of like keeping a joy like photo library. So as you walk around, every time you see something that gives you that kind of sense of uplift, take a picture to remember that the beautiful thing you've seen or the happy memory. Or, I think we get a little bit too obsessed with photographing everything. It's certainly selfies. But I think as a catalogue or a prompt to remember little moments of joy, it's actually a really helpful thing, I find.
Love that. Another one that I've sometimes done is I call it a joy jar. And you basically just take a jar and you take little slips of paper. And when you notice something that brings you joy, when you experience something, you have a memory, just drop it in there. And then, later you can decide when, at the end of the year, you can open it up and probably a lot of those things you forget. we do it a lot now because we're writing down funny things our son says, so we are always trying to capture those things so we don't lose them. And when we look back over that list, even 6 months, we had totally forgotten about some of those really sweet, funny moments that we'd had together.
I'm feeling really full of fantastic ideas that you've shared, but also people have been sharing in the chat. And although there's lots of other great questions, which we're really grateful for, I'd love us to sort of, before we leave you with a final word today, Ingrid, I'd love to turn back to the community and actually ask people to just, let's all take a moment just to reflect on this joyful time. And, so grateful to you for giving your time, Ingrid, especially when you're feeling a bit under the weather. But let's bring to mind an idea or ideas that we've been struck by in this session that we want to take away. And I would just encourage you to think about a specific action, activity, joyful practice that you either already do and want to do more of, or that you've heard about in this event and would like to sort of build into your life. Let's just, if you'd like to take a few moments to share in the chat what you're going to do, I think it's really helpful both to think about this, but also to tell others about your joyful commitment to do something. And let's just see what people are planning to do as a result of your wisdom today, Ingrid. So starting a joy jar. That seems to be a popular idea that's come up in the chat. Designing joy into my environment, stop procrastinating, joy spotting, colouring, fairy lights, arts and colours, bringing more colour into the house, flowers around the place, noticing repeatable moments of joy, taking photos of joyful moments, drawing at bedtime, buying more round things, candlelight, more fairy lights, daily photos. Wow, this is great. So lots of things that you've shared. Also a few that I think have come up in the chat, particularly curves, essential oils, sunrise. I'm really grateful to all of you for being so engaged with this. But I feel that, well, actually in a moment I'll hand back to you, Ingrid, but actually just to tell you all that we're going to have a recording of this fantastic conversation. All Ingrid's great ideas will be shared with everyone who's signed up for this tomorrow, and also some fantastic resources that, Ingrid, you might want to say a little bit more about, but I know you've got a link not only to your book, but also there's something about 50 ways to create more joy, but also I think you've got a great thing for like the festive season as well, haven't you? What was that?
Yes. Okay. So 50 ways to create joy. It's a free resource, and it's everything is like under $10. They're really there's quick pick-me-ups. There's things you can do in your home. There's things you can do in your work, in your office.
Amazing.
So that's, I think, one resource that can be helpful. The other one is a joyful conversation starters guide. I know that we're going into the holidays, and sometimes you sit down across the table from your family you haven't seen for a long time, and it's very natural to just start talking about the news. So these conversation starters, and I've heard from a lot of people who cut them up and print them out, cut them up and put them on the table, either at a holiday dinner or at a team meeting as an icebreaker. But they're joyful, 36 joyful questions, so that you have something to talk about with your friends and family, and your coworkers that is joyful, that can start those joyful conversations.
I'm definitely going to do that. Ingrid, thank you so much. Really grateful for your time, and especially for making time for this at a time when you're, not in full health. And we wish you back to full health very quickly, and keep up this amazing, inspiring work on joy. Would you like to leave us with a final thought to sort of summarize all of what we've talked about today?
I think there's just one thing, which is that just remember that joy is a biological hardwired emotion. You have it for a reason. I think a lot of us treat joy as a reward. We get joy when we've been productive. We get joy when we've been good. We get dessert when we've eaten the salad, right? We treat joy as something that we get only if we meet certain conditions. And I would really urge you to remember that you deserve joy. You deserve it just as you are. Joy is not something that is a reward. Joy is something that you are entitled to just by being alive, just by being human. And so remembering to allow yourself that joy and not make it something you have to earn. That has been the most radical shift in my own life. And I think if you can start to do that for yourself, and you can start to do that for others, I think that is probably the most liberating thing we can all do. So happy joy spotting.
Yeah, radical joy and liberation. I love the sound of that. That's great. Ingrid, thank you for your time. Thank you for your work. Thank you for the inspiration. And thank you to everyone who's been part of this. Please do continue to stay part of the Action for Happiness community. We make a simple pledge to create more happiness and less unhappiness in the world. Ingrid, you've certainly helped us do that today, as have everyone who's made lovely contributions with your feedback, your great questions, and all of the participation. Thank you, everyone. Ingrid, see you again soon, I hope.
Thank you.